Well, hello and welcome. You're watching a special broadcast on Times Now. I'm Siddharth Talia and I'm joined currently by Dr. Parag Khanna, futurist as well as author, to give us a perspective on what's really happening at the World Economic Forum, because Donald Trump, the President of the United States, is also there. And we're going to be talking about some of the issues that will take center stage, including, of course, Donald Trump's own plans for Greenland, his imposition of tariffs on different countries across the world, and the resistance that's come from Europe with respect to what Donald Trump has in mind for Greenland, amid a whole host of other issues that is likely now to dominate the agenda at the World Economic Forum. Many thanks, Dr. Khanna, for speaking to Times Now. Let's begin with Donald Trump as well as Greenland and the realignment of the global order that we're witnessing right now. What's your assessment of what President Trump has in mind for Greenland, and how do you see the current situation evolving?
I think the reaction to his actions will prove to be as decisive as his own statements. As you know, his art of the deal includes the first move, which is to be a bold, outlandish, almost insane sort of proposition that they will simply militarily seize the entire island. And now you've seen the pushback, and the pushback is what will drive some kind of a compromise. And the compromise could take many forms. It could be enhanced NATO presence, including more U.S. forces. It could be that Greenland moves ever more towards independence, and then when it does become independent, it could become a member of a North American federation of states. And various things like that. And along the way, whether NATO winds up being dissolved over this issue is TBD, and Canada might play a role. Mark Carney, as you know, gave a very stirring speech yesterday in which he too recognized the threat posed by Donald Trump's sort of tactics and strategies. So the future of Greenland itself is something that for which there's still 5 or 6 different scenarios that are equally plausible. But one thing is for sure, Trump's visit here is in some ways actually symbolic of how the whole idea of Make America Great Again, MAGA, it does not necessarily mean American isolation. And I think that's something that's worth reflecting on.
Well, it clearly doesn't mean American isolation, because America is growing all the more interventionist, claiming to have mediated, quote unquote, in several conflicts around the world. And now Donald Trump has also formed his own peace board, extending invitations to countries like India, among others, to participate in. What do you make of that?
Well, each of these conflicts really does have to be treated in isolation. Yes, of course, there are many geographies that are flaring simultaneously. One could look at their efforts to contain Iran, given the instability there as protesters rise up in the streets. The current situation still, of course, with Gaza, Greenland, other conflicts around the world. But even though these are happening at the same time, it doesn't mean they're linked. So this Board of Peace idea that now there is going to be a Palestinian-led council for the rehabilitation of Gaza in particular is perhaps will wind up being just one of the very brief episodes or plans. We've seen many acronyms for organizations and proposals come and go, some from government, some from management consulting firms. So I don't know if the Board for Peace with respect to Gaza is actually going to last. I believe that in all likelihood Israel is going to continue to seek ways to ensure its complete dominance and even eventual sovereignty over Gaza.
Dr. Khanna, coming to another matter now, there clearly is a very strong economic consideration that appears to be underpinning Donald Trump's plans all across. Now, you yourself have spoken about the importance of Paxilica, which is an American-led initiative, and how the focus is largely on reducing dependence on China on multiple fronts, including supply chains. How do you see others responding to this around the world?
Yes, that is an area of significant continuity with the Biden administration as well, where they sought to ensure that and this is obviously one reality or function of COVID, where we learned that whether it comes to medical devices, battery components for electric vehicles, semiconductor supply chains as well, in many of these absolutely critical economic areas, there is a national objective in the United States, and quite frankly now in other countries in the world as well, not least Japan, the European Union, and so forth, to make sure that there is not an over-dependency on China. So this is an area in which pretty much every country in the world except China would agree. And therefore initiatives such as Paxilica have growing numbers of members. The Mine to Magnet initiative for rare earth minerals, which are critical for the electric vehicle and semiconductor supply chains. All of these are actually flourishing, thriving examples of a new multilateralism, one that's based on international coalitions that might be less formalized. They're networks. They don't rely on central bureaucracies in places like New York or Paris or Geneva. And I think that's absolutely fine. Let's remember that India is a member of a number of these initiatives. It has every reason and logical, rational reason to want to be part of them, because India itself has rare earth minerals. India itself has a demand, has a desire to build up its semiconductor industry and be part of global semiconductor supply chains. And as we know, China is doing its best to suppress India's development and maturity in some of these critical areas. So what we see then is, again, not a retreat from the world, but a re-engagement along functional or thematic issues that really matter not only to the United States, but to all of the participants, including India itself.
Well, let's speak about India for a bit, because India's ties with the United States of America have also undergone a change in recent times under the Donald Trump presidency. India has been at the receiving end of tariffs and also penalties for doing business with Russia. The Chabahar port agreement with Iran stands completely jeopardized due to American sanctions. India is also expected, of course, to act in its own interests, to protect its own interests. But many of those interests, Dr. Khanna, people would argue, have been hurt by American actions in the recent past. So therefore, how does India respond?
I think there clearly have been, again, simultaneously a fair number of blows: immigration restrictions, tariffs, the sanctions related to Russia, secondary oil trade, all hitting at the same time. But India does not put all of its eggs in one basket. India is practicing what I call multi-alignment. India is maintaining its ties with Russia. It is accommodating and making amends in various tactical ways with China. It is signing a fair number of new trade agreements with European countries, the German government, the UK government. Many heads of state have been visiting India recently to strengthen those bilateral trade ties. And India could, of course, go back to the regional comprehensive economic partnership to expand its trade to the east as well. And so I think that every country is responding its way. The U.S. itself is also being punished in some ways by China. We've seen, again, the critical minerals bans and other kinds of moves. So India is not the only country that is being punched by another country. It seems like everyone is punching everyone right now. And strategic resilience is the art of having, or rather the diplomatic and the industrial efforts that go into having your own very strong economic foundations domestically, while also remaining very diversified and connected internationally, so that you can get the critical technologies, components that you need.
But how long do you expect this arm wrestle to continue? Because there's an expectation from Donald Trump that India falls in line with his priorities, but India is, of course, looking out for itself.
Well, it's a perpetual tit for tat and tug of war in terms of making concessions mutually and otherwise, but also making adjustments. So we should look less at the short-term concessions made to the United States and more at the new agreements that are forged, because those represent the future structure and order. Again, I give the example of India's trying to cement stronger trade relationships with Asian countries, with Gulf countries, with Africa, most certainly with the European Union. So if we want to see what the future design, if you will, of the international system is going to be, the future world order, we should look at these new connections that are emerging. And those point to Europe clearly standing up for itself, Europe wanting to diminish its dependence on the United States, potentially invest more capital in emerging markets to avoid excessive exposure to the U.S. dollar and to the U.S. political economy and so forth. So these are some of the things that I know that Indian officials are looking at very carefully. And in doing so, they can play upon the fact that India is the world's fastest growing large economy, and some of the other key drivers that make investors want to do business in India.
Well, let's come back to the question of Greenland. You spoke earlier in your responses about multiple scenarios at play, but let me specifically ask about one. Will Donald Trump exercise a military option?
No, it is most definitely one of the scenarios, and that's why you've seen Europeans respond by sending maybe a few dozen troops from a multinational set of countries in Europe to Greenland to participate in various exercises. But again, the occupation of such a large territory is not itself possible. Perhaps the occupation of the key population center, of which there's just one or two. But again, these are just really scenarios. Holding such a vast territory is not likely, and one could imagine the very negative consequences, even things like an insurgency. So clearly this hasn't been thought through fully. It's really something that was designed to be a diplomatic gambit, again, a maximalist position taken in terms of a vast claim to want to simply occupy and annex the entire island, but the reality is going to wind up being something more modest than that.
Finally, Dr. Khanna, Donald Trump is in Davos. What do you expect to be the key takeaways or the message that he'll be sending to the rest of the world there?
I think the critical message, which again some of his cabinet members who have been here have already said, is that America first does not mean America alone. America is growing economically very rapidly. It does present a very attractive investment destination in key sectors. It is a leader in AI. It is trying to reform and deregulate some critical areas that are important to foreign investors. So even though there's a lot of haphazardness, clearly they're here to engage the world. Let's remember that the notion that Trump represents isolationism is obviously not the case given the size of the delegation that he has here at Davos. Many people have spoken about MAGA as being anti-globalist, but here we are in Davos, the temple of globalist capitalism, and he's shown up with the largest delegation ever. So we really have to start to reconcile some of these seeming opposite notions to really understand what's going on, and the truth is that America does not want to be alone. It may want to lead, and it may succeed or fail in leading in certain areas, but it does not want to be isolated.
Well, will there be a middle ground on all these contentious issues? And if so, what specifically will that middle ground be? That's the big question indeed. Many thanks, Dr. Khanna, for your perspective on this. And we'll, of course, continue our coverage of all the happenings at Davos at the World Economic Forum.